Hello and welcome to today's discussion, Malaysia, China and the region in a pivotal year. My name is Susannah Patton and I'm the Director of the Southeast Asia Program here at the Lowy Institute. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we meet on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and extend my respect to elders past and present. I'm really thrilled to be hosting today's discussion, bringing perspectives from the ANU Malaysia update, which will take place in Canberra on Friday. This year, Malaysia is the chair of ASEAN, which gives it a special prominence in regional diplomacy, something we've seen in recent days with PM Anwar convening leaders from Thailand and Cambodia to discuss a ceasefire deal. But more broadly, I think Malaysia is at a really interesting inflection point in its foreign policy and engagement with the world, given that we're in an increasingly challenging period with many countries having to navigate between the US and China. Let me briefly introduce our speakers for today's session and then we'll get stuck into our discussion. To my far right, Dr. Ross Tapsell is the Director of the ANU Malaysia Institute and Associate Professor at the Australian National University's College of Asia and the Pacific. Ross is the convener of this year's Malaysia Update Conference. Dr. Syaza Shukri is Associate Professor at the International Islamic University of Malaysia and a Visiting Fellow at the Iseas Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. And Dr. Chow-Bing is Associate Professor and Director of the Institute of China Studies at the University of Malaya and a non-resident scholar at Carnegie, China. So we're really thrilled to have you all with us here today. So Ross, let me start by asking you to frame up the conversation. You're convening this year's Malaysia Update. You've brought together a great lineup of speakers from Australia and Malaysia. What do you think are the key drivers that we need to understand here in Australia about what's happening in Malaysia at this point in terms of its regional role and engagement with the world?
Yeah, thank you, Susannah, and thanks everyone for coming. Great to see such a large full room to talk about Malaysia. Malaysia is often like a bellwether country for how we see the region. I guess if it was a US state in an election, it'd be like Wisconsin or something, like a bellwether state or a swing. So we think of Malaysia as very important for geopolitical and state of democracy in the region. Malaysia is often considered to be hedging between the US and China. That's a term in IR that's often used. But the debates now will be, is it hedging more towards China? Chow-Bing, I guess, will talk about this. Economically, it's a middle-income country. Its economy is doing reasonably well, but there is, similar to Australia, cost of living pressures, concerns around growing inequality. Malaysia is very important to Australia. It's our second largest trading partner in ASEAN. We're both in the top 10 of each other's. I think it's 8th for Australia is 8th for Malaysia and 10th for Australia. So. There is good trade and investment going on. The issue that we're thinking about for this conference is businesses and governments, they're relying on a predictable regulatory environment. And Malaysia's political environment over the last, 8 years or so has not been predictable. In some ways, there's a lot of good things to come for that, a more democratic Malaysia, a more open contest during election times. Freer and fairer elections since 2022, but the question is, is this predictable, regular environment going to remain predictable at a time of great political uncertainty? So Malaysian often joke that, we're Singapore but at a discount, and that's no longer the case. We can't really see Malaysia, I think, as the predictable model that you might see Singapore. For Australia, Malaysia exemplifies a lot about our Southeast Asia strategy. Migration is hugely important to the Australia-Malaysia relationship. There's about 180,000 Australians who were born in Malaysia, perhaps some of you in this room. And we have some very prominent Malaysian Australians, including, of course, in foreign policy, with Penny Wong being the foreign minister. So we often take it for granted. We take it for granted, and we're often sometimes unimaginative with Malaysia because of these people-to-people and migration links. For example, when we changed the rules to make it harder for Malaysians to get a visa to Australia, because Malaysia was the #1 visa overstayer in Malaysia at a period of time, suddenly that can really upend how Malaysians think about Australia, that they're getting rejected for visas in ways that they didn't expect to get rejected, for not ticking the right box and not having the right form, and then suddenly you're rejected for a visa to Australia. In universities, of course, and education, a hugely important part of the Malaysia-Australia relationship. Lots of Malaysians studying in Australia. I would say that one of our problems is that we are dropping the numbers broadly of Malaysians studying in Australia, but also the elites and the high-level Malaysians that we have that have gone on into positions of business or government, or positions of power in various industries, are no longer coming to Australia in the way that they used to in the 60s, 70s, or even in the early 1990s. And so just from my own experience at the ANU, where we do have alumni who are in government and business and high court judges and so on, that generation isn't coming through again to Australia, in large part because I think we're not emphasising enough, we're not advertising enough that Australian universities should be places for the best of Malaysians, but also because we're losing a lot of expertise, and a number of people that I would have ordinarily invited to the conference in Canberra have lost their jobs over the last 12 to 24 months. So our expertise on Southeast Asia and Malaysia is declining. And even in my own institution that I am working at now, ANU, we're having a lot of job cuts at the moment. So this is a broader concern about the education sector, which I think is very important for Australia-Malaysia relationship. Very finally, diplomatic links, of course, very strong. You ask any ambassador or high commissioner in Southeast Asia, how's our relationship? They'll say it's wonderful, terrific. Beauty bonds have never been better. But regionally, we're losing influence, I think. And so I'll leave you with that comment to see what the rest think.
Yeah, so let me turn to you, Chow-Bing. So your research focuses on Malaysian foreign policy, especially relations with China. Can you give us your sense of PM Anwar as a foreign policy maker in general, and then specifically your views on the Malaysia-China relationship? To what extent is that changing under Anwar, or is this more a case of continuity with the past?
Thanks, Susannah. Thanks, Ross, for inviting me to be here, and very glad to have this platform to share my views and observations. First of all, I think about Prime Minister Anwar as a foreign policy maker as a general picture. This is a cabinet basically pretty much very deferential to Anwar, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim as a foreign policy maker, because with all due respect to the foreign ministers and other ministers that hold portfolios that are related to some of the international issues, Anwar basically has an outsized personality and presence when it comes to international issues. He basically dominates. He's basically well known internationally, regionally. I mean, compared to some of his predecessors, the past two predecessors, people probably have no idea who are they unless you are familiar with Malaysia. But Anwar's name, reputation, basically he puts Malaysia on the map in a way. So, and that gives him also a lot of confidence, and that he is the primary foreign policy maker in Malaysia. That's in one way, it's a continuity in terms of Malaysia having a very PM-centric foreign policy process. Sometimes it depends on different prime minister also. But in a way, he has his own dynamic, how he views the world, how he understands and interprets and judges and reads. Sometimes, and perhaps most of the time, can actually have an impact on the foreign policy of Malaysia. One good example would be BRICS, the decision to join the BRICS. I think he was pretty much Anwar's own personal reading, judgment, in terms of joining this platform or organization. And then the whole cabinet and the whole foreign ministry came to endorse afterwards, not before that. So there's perhaps one example how Anwar basically today dominates foreign policy thinking in Malaysia. The other side of it, of course, is that sometimes that he may have I would say sometimes he may have too much of influence in a way, in the sense that there is not enough second opinion from within the cabinet to sometimes say to Prime Minister, no, whether this is a good idea or not, no, whether we should think through it again, and so on and so forth. But I do think that in time, of course, his foreign policy generally will get the consensual support from these cabinet ministers as well. When it comes to China, Malaysia-China relation is generally stable and consistent over the years. The only time when there was a period of uncertainty was back in 2018 when we have a change of government that made Malaysia more open and dynamic. And then the foreign policy side of it was that there was a period of, I wouldn't say it's a drastic change. Malaysia never experienced like some other countries have, with a different administration, you have a wide swing in foreign policy. It was never really the case, but there was a period that was a bit of uncertainty or hesitancy, I would say. But overall, the pattern is still quite generally, I would say, positive and consistent. And in that sense, Anwar is much more a continuity in terms of relationship with China. But again, the differences will be he is very much determined, I would say, in enhancing and upgrading the relationship to the extent of that there are a lot of interpretations out there that Malaysia is now shifting more towards China in terms of a very binary, whether US or China kind of a view.
I'd be interested if we could go a bit more into the domestic drivers of Malaysia's foreign policy. The main opposition to PM Anwar is PAS, a conservative Islamist party. How do you see Islamist pressure more broadly shaping Anwar's foreign policy, especially on the Middle East, but perhaps with implications that extend beyond the Middle East as well?
Thank you, Susannah, and thank you to the Lowy Institute for having us. Good morning. So I want to build on what Chow-Bing mentioned, that I also feel that the foreign policy in Malaysia is really an Anwar's foreign policy, right? It's not really like his administration and government. And I relate that to domestic politics because, as Susannah mentioned, that Anwar's coalition is stable right now. But when it was formed, it was seen as fragile. We don't know yet how it would pan out. We don't know what's the relationship with his partner, Barisan Nasional. But now it looks quite stable. So for Anwar, the main pressure points are coming from the opposition. The coalition is called Perikatan Nasional, but the main party within it is the Islamist PAS. So for Perikatan Nasional, their main support comes from the Malay Muslims. And that is the struggle for Anwar to get the support from this base. And we can see that the best example we can talk about it is we had a protest that happened over the weekend on the 26th, which was organized by the opposition. The protest was mostly on economic issues, like Ross mentioned, cost of living issues, prices of healthcare, of housing are going up. Wages are stagnant. So these are the main issues that were voiced out during the protest. But we cannot run away from the fact that it was organized by the opposition. And if we look at the participants of that protest itself, most are from the Malay Muslim community. So this is who Anwar is trying to win over. Which we can discuss, will it work or not? My suspicion is it's going to be a very difficult task for him. But the point is that in trying to win over the Malay Muslims, he had to speak more on Malay Muslim issues on the global stage. The best example is, of course, on the Palestinian issue. Of course, we can argue that this is like Anwar's long-standing view. If you follow him, even from his youth activism days, he's always spoken up on the Palestinian issue. So this appears like a continuation of that. Sure, but I also made the argument that it is a kind of political calibration as well. It's kind of a domestic signaling that I am still a champion of these causes. So the opposition cannot claim that, oh, Anwar is this quote-unquote liberal, which is used in Malaysia as a derogatory term, or a pejorative anyway, that, oh, Anwar is a liberal. So he can say that, if I'm a liberal, why would I care about the Palestinian issue? And he's very vocal on what's going on in Gaza. We know that since 2023, I think he held a rally in October, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, at the end of October, he held a huge rally. I think Anwar is among the most vocal among Muslim leaders right now. And it has its issues, of course, because like I mentioned earlier, the concerns of the public is on the economic issues. So that is why if you look at his foreign policy, he's been going around trying to get investments from all across the world, but he's trying to balance that with his outspokenness on Gaza. And it's not just Gaza, right? When the Iranian attacks on Iran happened, he was vocal about that as well. So again, my argument is that this is all a posturing from him for him to claim legitimacy as a Muslim leader in Malaysia and also globally.
On the US, maybe Chow-Bing, back to you. We've talked a bit about the way that Middle East issues play into the US-Malaysia relationship. Obviously, the lack of high-level contact. I think there's not been a phone call even between the Prime Minister and President Trump here in Australia. There's a lot of concern about our lack of high-level contact as well, but we have had a phone call or two, I think. How is the tariff question playing in? Because Malaysia, of course, is a big exporting country. And we're still waiting to find out the outcome on the tariff question. But how's that being looked at in Malaysia?
Yeah. Well, traditionally, interactions with the US leaders, generally speaking, is, if you look back to history, there haven't really been a lot of American presidential visits to the country. Obama came when he was in power. And before Obama, you have to trace all the way back to, let me think, maybe Lyndon Johnson. Yeah, if my memory serves me right. So that is not the main avenue for the US to exercise its diplomacy. So we have to put that in context. Of course, China is closer geographically, and again, we put it to US-China lens, then China enjoy a lot of advantages. Prime Minister Anwar already met Li Qiang, Premier of China, I think at least four times, and Xi Jinping at least twice. Xi Jinping also visited Malaysia this year. So the personal rapport is quite good. You won't see that between Prime Minister Anwar and President Trump. Even if they have met, I think they won't really develop personal chemistry or rapport. So at one level, personal level, top level interaction has not really been the focus of US diplomacy in a way. They have always focused more on a very tangible, functional areas of cooperation. And that is something sometimes Malaysia can appreciate too, because again, coming back to the complications from Middle East conflicts over there, sometimes not necessarily a good idea to be pictured together with President Trump. So rather, you just want to have very tangible, functional cooperation. And at that level, I would say Malaysia-US relationship is still quite well established, quite strong, especially those who are working on the defense and security sector. US and Australia are the two long-standing security and defense partners of Malaysia. These are the two strongest, most well-developed and robust defense and security programs, including exercises, training, officer education, and so on and so forth. So I think at that front, US-Malaysia relationship is still going quite well, I would say well, but generally stable. But of course, we don't know whether Trump may think that all this exercise with Malaysia military is a waste of money, and then he may decide something else. So far, it hasn't really happened yet, but maybe in the future, and then it will also, if that happens, it will cut into some of the very positive and functional collaboration between Malaysia and US currently.
Chow-Bing, you mentioned the BRICS earlier on. I'm interested to ask you, Syaza, about the BRICS and this idea about sort of cooperation with a broader range of countries from the global south. How do you see that as a sort of strand within Malaysia's foreign policy? Do you think it's becoming more important, that idea? And to what extent is it sort of political versus being about the economic objective of diversifying exports?
Right. I think I don't have much to add to what Chow-Bing said. But basically, my feeling is that definitely Malaysia being a partner, right? A partner in BRICS is a form of pluralizing our foreign policy, to not be too dependent on either Malaysia or China. But I do feel that part of it is a political project, again, trying to show that Anwar, beyond just being, like I was saying earlier, the so-called global Muslim leader, but also a leader of the global South, that he is the face of those who are downtrodden. And again, this is something that you can trace back in Anwar's journey, I guess. He's always been this champion of the poor, being a bit of anti-hegemonic. But, when I think of what's going on right now, when we talk about Malaysia's relationship with all these other countries, I was thinking and I was comparing in my head about Mahathir. So Mahathir was our prime minister in the 80s and 90s. And of course, the thing that I was thinking of is Mahathir is just as outspoken, being so-called anti-Western and all of these things that were going on back then. So I was trying to think, what's the difference between back then and Anwar now? What's the situation? And I feel that during Mahathir's time, the main thing is that he had a more stable government, definitely a stronger economy in the 90s. So whatever he says back then, kind of no one really questions it. But what's going on in Malaysia right now with Anwar and what we discussed earlier and all the problems that he's facing right now, everything that he says gets questioned. Of course, it's political, the opposition doesn't really have an alternative response to whatever is going on. But it's unfortunate that he needs to kind of raise the bar every time he speaks up about whatever it is, the global South and everything else.
I don't know, Ross, did you want to offer any thoughts on how you see sort of PM Anwar in that role as ASEAN chair? It's obviously been quite prominent in the last few days in particular. What strikes you about the way that Malaysia's approached this task?
Well, this could be a good debate, between the three of us, because we've been putting a lot of energy into ASEAN. Australian government's been putting a lot of energies and programs and second track diplomacy efforts in the hope that that Anwar and Malaysia will be using ASEAN in a way that is, I guess, more forceful, more active, more. I'm not sure if aggressive is the right word, but more
Robust.
Robust, yes. It'd be a good question. Has that delivered? Not much on Myanmar. Yes, inclusion of East Timor, that's a great thing. That's been a positive. But, we would like to see, I'm sure in Australia, would like to see more statements about South China Sea. Even in this recent Thai-Cambodia conflict, which Anwar is saying, well, look, this shows that ASEAN works. And of course, he's claiming credit and deserves some credit for the meetings that were held. But even then, you could question whether Trump's intervention was actually the more assertive and more powerful thing that got the ceasefire. Don't want to give Trump too much credit there, but the point is Anwar was making statements about ASEAN stepping in quite a few weeks before. So I don't know, I'm skeptical, but I'd be interested in what others think about Malaysia and ASEAN so far. It's early days.
Yeah, it's already halfway through.
Halfway, yeah, true.
Halfway through. I don't think the big geopolitical issues will be solved this year or next year anyway. actually the Thai-Cambodia, in a way, it's true the Trump pressure probably play a very important role, but it's unexpected when Malaysia assumed the presidency, the chairmanship, that there will be this conflict, and then at least Malaysia or Anwar can claim that, well, we have done something in terms of solving, or put a temporary pause to one of the hot conflict issues within the region. But other ongoing, more difficult issues, Myanmar and South China Sea, actually, I don't think from the very beginning that there will be any breakthrough within this year or next year. The issues are basically, to a certain extent, beyond any ASEAN chair. It doesn't mean that as a chair you can make things move. It doesn't work that way. It depends a lot on the actual actors within the parties to this conflict, how their interests have come to the point that where they have to make compromises. The most is that you can keep emphasizing this, and then you can provide the agenda, you can provide the platform, you can increase the number of discussions and meetings just to try to see if they can come to that level. But I don't think it can be solvable this year or next year.
We'll leave our discussion there. For those of you who are interested in learning more, I think I'm right in saying that you can tune into the conference on Friday online, so you don't have to travel to Canberra. It's cold enough here in Sydney as it is.
You are very welcome.
Please join me in thanking our panellists.